Shabbat Shalom. A family friend of ours is an Orthodox rabbi and a leader globally in interfaith work. And he says there's a common observation among the Jews who do that interfaith work professionally at that level. And he says that you can hear a Hindu Swami talk for hours, and every sentence has God in it. Also an imam and other faiths. But you can hear a rabbi talk for 3 hours and not hear God once. And it's not just rabbis. Jews do not use God language very much. It's part of how it's developed, and it makes sense. After the Holocaust, how can there be a God? And I can say one of the most common statements the rabbis hear is, how can I believe in God after the Holocaust? We may be one of the only religions in the world where in any of our worship spaces, many of the regulars on the morning spend 2 hours praising God and thanking God, but do not really want to look in that direction and acknowledge what's being said. And even religious Jews say, Baruch Hashem, but the word Hashem is already removed from Adonai and from Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, from God's actual name. So after the Shoah, we are left with God was not there, or God is not good, or God cannot do anything, or we just can't understand, or God is not. It's bewildering. Now, Parsha Emor this morning says that the priests were not permitted to make themselves impure by coming close and being in contact with death, except for their closest relatives, their children, their spouses, their parents, their siblings, which is where we then derive our laws of whom we say Shiva for. But for other passings, they could not approach. And a Hasidic commentator, the Mea Shiloach, says that a person who is engaged in religious or spiritual matters has a deep and sensitive connection to spirit, to God, and they're looking in that, always in that direction to make sense of their lives in this world, to draw inspiration, to develop, to find strength. But when that person with such a relationship is exposed to too much death, they feel great anguish about human suffering, their own or others, and they become angry with God. How could God allow this? And seeing the pain of this world, overwhelmed and angry, they can no longer fulfill their mission as a spiritual religious person. And the priests, they needed to uphold the Jewish people, to do the worship of God, to lead the people, so they couldn't be exposed to too much death. For their own families, yes, but not if it stopped them from doing what needed to be done. And of course, it was, on the other hand, also important for them to be able to understand human suffering to fulfill their task at the same time. So they saw we read earlier in the Torah, they saw the lepers and had to decide and bring them back and in from after they were declared pure or impure. And day in, day out, they saw the downcast and the sinners who brought offerings to come back to wholeness. But there was a limit. And for 2,000 years, we came very close to our limit, really beyond the limit, really. Do you have a prayer for the Tsar? What does God say about him? Couldn't you choose someone else for a change? And we understood the depths of human suffering and therefore compassion, but we were very close to being exposed to too much of it ourselves. And then the Shoah happened. And Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach says this is what happened. We were people engaged in religious and spiritual life for millennia. In fact, it was our connection to God that enabled us to go through and survive. Despite it all, somehow, everything we endured, there was a purpose to it. There was someone whom we would not abandon, and one day we would be they would remember us the way they remembered our forefathers and foremothers, and they remember the covenant and patriarchs and matriarchs. Some even said we must have sinned to deserve all of this. And we could do our best, and we could plead and even argue. Do you have a prayer for the Tsar? Don't you remember and love us? Or as Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev used to say, you would turn to God and say, don't you remember what we looked like on the day of our wedding? Don't you love us? And then the Holocaust happened. And for many, the limit was just simply crossed. And there were those few who, they pushed the limit themselves as far as they could, and they went to their deaths singing, I believe. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach says, in our sensitivity and dedication for millennia to being a kingdom of priests, as the Torah says, we became a people angry at God. We do not want to hear about God. And we still come to shul and pray our old prayers, but don't tell me about God. And it makes good sense. But how do we fulfill what we are supposed to when we no longer believe in the very premise? And it creates a disharmony in our being, a dysfunction in our people. But when the limit is crossed, how do you walk back? And we are still a people of priests in the sense we want to give and we want to transform. But we're missing the most important piece, the piece to launch the whole project, the piece that fuels our drive to heal and transform, and the piece that inspires us and heals us. So how do we ask our people to stop being angry? We can try to understand. We can try and change. Maybe God is this or that instead of this is this. We can try to count our blessings, and yes, we have a state now. We can raise our arms and say, I just cannot comprehend. And perhaps time will heal, and there are no good answers. But what is clear is that we all feel compelled by our mission to help, and it is too deeply inside of us. We are too stubborn to give it all up completely. But we also need to return to wholeness and peace. Perhaps all we can do is each one of us find our place from where to live this part of our people, of being a priest or priestess, of wrestling with God and the Shoah, what it means, and our own way to believe, to walk, to find peace, and to bring light from that place to all peoples and nations. Shabbat Shalom.